All right, let's dive into something really fascinating today. We're taking a deep dive into The Resurrection of the Meadow by Robin Artisson.
Oh, this is a good one. It's not your typical nature book.
Definitely not. It's about connecting with nature in a whole new way, centered around this idea of the sacred feminine.
And when you say that, people might think it's just for women, but that's not what Artison's getting at.
Yeah, so clear that up for us. What exactly do we mean by the sacred feminine in this context?
Well, he describes it as a kind of life force, an energy that's present in everything.
Okay, so it's not about gender, but more of an energy. Give me a concrete example here. What does this life force actually look like in the book?
Imagine the energy of creation, of nurturing, the natural cycles of life and death.
Those are big concepts.
They are, and Artisan connects these to ancient practices like goddess worship, which was so connected to the seasons. He even suggests that by tapping into these old ways of thinking, we can find a sense of balance and wholeness in our own lives.
I can definitely see where the resurrection part of the title comes in, but how does he make these ancient ideas relevant to us today?
That's where things get interesting. He brings in this concept of animism.
Animism, like everything in nature has a spirit.
That's it. He's saying we need to shift from seeing nature as a collection of objects to recognizing it as a living, breathing, spiritual force. It's not just a pretty view, it's alive with its own energy.
So instead of admiring a sunset, we should be connecting with the spirit of the sun itself.
Exactly. He even talks about spirit allies and ancestors in nature. Think of it this way. There's a whole unseen world alongside our own, and according to Artisan, we can tap into its wisdom. We can even connect with the spirits of that world.
Okay, now this is starting to sound a little like, I don't know, magic or something.
Well, he doesn't shy away from the magical aspects of nature, but he grounds in these very real, very ancient ways of seeing the world. And one of the ways he illustrates these ideas, are you ready for this, is through storytelling.
Storytelling. So instead of just saying nature has a spirit, he's weaving us a tale.
Right. He uses myths, folklore, even fairy tales.
Okay, so we're not just talking about like Little Red Riding Hood here. Give me an example. What's one of the stories he uses?
One that stands out is the story of the Kelleach, this powerful figure from Celtic mythology.
The Kelleach. I'm not familiar.
She's often portrayed as this, like, wild woman or hag who rules over winter and the darker aspects of nature.
Hold on. A wild winter goddess. Okay, now you've got my attention. What does she represent in the context of all this?
Well, Artisan uses the Kelleach to show that the sacred feminine isn't always about beauty and, springtime. She's powerful, but kind of scary too, right? She's more like raw nature.
So more like winter is coming, but then spring follows.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
He makes this really interesting connection. So figures like the Kelleach, they reflect how some cultures see aging, especially in women. It's not about decline, but about like stepping into wisdom and power.
I like that. Not fading away, but becoming even more potent.
Exactly. And that actually leads us to another big theme in The Resurrection of the Meadow.
Which is?
Connecting with the land, but I mean really connecting to the specific place where you live, your own backyard.
So that's where the meadow comes in. Why a meadow and not like a mountaintop?
Okay, so for one, meadows are full of life, always changing, but they regenerate,
Yeah.
And I think Artisan uses the meadow as this symbol of that vitality.
Okay, I'm with you.
The earth has this amazing power to heal, to renew itself, but it also represents something else, our own disconnect from nature.
So we're like those wilted flowers you sometimes see in a parking lot.
Exactly. We've forgotten how to be part of something bigger. He calls it land-based spirituality.
Mm.
And it's about, recognizing the energy of where you live, like honoring the spirits of that place and understanding its history.
Yeah, I mean, a forest feels different from a desert, right? Or even from a city.
Exactly. But so often we just walk through those places without really being present.
Tuning it all out.
And Artisan would say that's a huge missed opportunity to tap into that sacred feminine energy. It's about, opening your senses, being present with the land.
So we have these big concepts, these myths, this call to connect. But how do we actually do this in our everyday lives?
That's where things get really practical. Artisan gives all these simple rituals, exercises that anyone can use.
Okay, give me an example, because I am all about practical.
One of the simplest is to create just a little sacred space outside. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. Find a quiet spot under a tree or even just a window box. And, you can meditate there, journal, or just breathe.
So it's about creating a little bit of intentionality, even in the middle of a busy day.
Exactly. Intention is everything. And that leads to another practice Artisan talks about, making offerings to nature.
Offerings. Okay, now we're getting into it. What kind of offerings?
Again, super simple. Artisan talks about leaving some rice, a flower at the base of a tree, or even just like pouring some water on the ground as an offering to the earth. It's just a way of acknowledging that we're all connected, we're part of this web of life.
So it's not that nature needs anything from us. It's more about shifting our own perspective.
Yes. And when you approach nature that way, with that reverence, you start to notice things you never did before.
It's like we're relearning how to speak the language of nature, one small offering, one quiet moment at a time. But I have to imagine there are some, let's say, skeptical listeners out there. What would you say to someone who's rolling their eyes at the idea of leaving rice for a tree? It's like we're relearning how to speak the language of nature, one small offering, one quiet moment at a time. But I have to imagine there are some, let's say, skeptical listeners out there. What would you say to someone who's rolling their eyes at the idea of leaving rice for a tree?
I get it. It can be hard to wrap your head around something new. But remember how we talked about those ancient cultures, the ones who saw nature as sacred. They weren't just worshiping trees or rocks. They were recognizing something bigger than themselves, something worth respecting. And Artison's reminding us that this ancient wisdom, it's still relevant today. We haven't somehow evolved past it. We've just forgotten.
So instead of thinking it's like woo-woo or whatever, maybe it's about seeing the world differently.
Yes. Less logic, more intuition, more connection, and a little more wonder wouldn't hurt either. When we approach nature with humility, it changes how we experience everything.
It's like rediscovering the magic that was always right in front of us.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of Artison's approach. He's not giving us a set of rules. It's not about having to believe in fairies.
Yeah.
It's about that reverence for nature and finding your own way to tap into its energy.
Finding what feels right for you, experimenting, maybe rediscovering a different side of yourself in the process.
Beautifully put. It's a journey, isn't it? Back to ourselves, to the earth. And honestly, I think that sense of belonging is something we're all craving in this crazy world.
Remembering that we are part of nature. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the resurrection of the meadow, what's the one thing you really want listeners to take away?
That the sacred feminine isn't just some vague idea, It's in us. It's all around us. And if we just open ourselves up, nature has this incredible way of leading us back to ourselves, back to wholeness.
Back to that ancient wisdom that's always been there, waiting for us to remember. So as you go about your day, ask yourself, how can you connect with the sacred feminine and nature's spirit today?
Maybe it's just taking a moment to really see a tree, or creating a little space in your home with things you find in nature, or just like breathing in the fresh air and appreciating it.
However you choose to connect, remember every step towards nature is a step toward yourself. Thanks for joining us for this incredible deep dive.